Thanks for the call out. All right, let's backtrack a second for the recording because we started the recording late. Our assignment was to take this AM_TX_RX flow graph and convert it to real radio. And so this was our simulation that we studied for a couple of weeks, and we went through the math. We went clear back to I don't think I have it loaded up here, but we went through the math of the multiply of the cosine and sine waves here. There's actually two cosine, and then how we arrive at an output here. And so this output just ties to this input down here on the lower left, which becomes our receiver. So this is just strictly a simulation, and the idea was take it from this simulation to the real radio world. So in the process of doing that, here's the final flow graph. We'll look at it for a minute, but then I'm going to bring up a comparison document that chops up these diagrams. So I've got a note here that it implements a hack RF for transmit and an RTL SDR for receive, two separate sample rates. And there's a reason for that. Could be implemented on a single analog devices advanced learning machine, Pluto, because it has duplex capability. So this is the Pluto. I don't think it will show up too well in the camera, but I've got a couple of them sitting here, and they will transmit and receive at the same time. And we've already seen some of that, or if you were at the Cowtown Hamfest, you did. So you'll see the SOAPy Hack RF block over here on the far right. That's going to be our 1 mega sample per second output device that will generate the carrier and take the modulation that's fed to it. And then you will see down here in the lower left, this is the RTL SDR, and it will be our receiver. I have a recorded video so that I don't screw it up in real time. I made it at 10 o'clock this morning or about 10:30, and we'll actually see all this stuff running and get to play with it a little bit. But this goes through this chain here, and it is a little bit different than the simulation. I'm about to show you the differences. Somewhere. Okay, maybe I just have to. All right, so we'll start with this set here. I hope that you can see this. See if I can get it a little bit bigger. Okay. I don't like where it's actually at right now. Find the slider marker that's hiding under all your names. All right. So, yeah, I can get it all fit on there at one time. All right. So let's just take it one at a time. The top is the simulation that we worked through and that we have learned from. And the bottom is the real world radio implementation. So the biggest thing that's different here is that there's no carrier needed, no generation of a carrier here where it says signal source, sample rate 48K and frequency 1 kilohertz. Don't need a carrier there because carrier is provided by the hack RF. We have to give it a center frequency, and that's the carrier. So you'll see it says 432.2 megahertz because I'm licensed to transmit on that band. So we're going to transmit and receive at 432.2 in this example. Otherwise, this has the same components. It has an audio source, which is a mic input. It does not have mic gain. That is a difference. I didn't need mic gain here. I probably didn't need it in the one above in the simulation, but I definitely know I didn't need it in the bottom one. I have a mic gain button on the microphone. I ended up having to turn it down. There was just too much gain. But we have the add one constant right here, just like we did in the simulation. Got to have that in order to have a carrier of any kind. And then we had the divide by two ditty that basically got us down to centered around 0.5 on a unit of one. You know, it just brought down the baseband. Then we've got a float to complex. This was required. Now, this does deviate from the simulation, and it's because we already know we're going to have to throw I and Q samples at the hack RF. It's a real SDR radio, and GNURadio, can handle everything about complex numbers as well as float/real numbers. But in order to modulate, or I would say in order to address the hack RF, we're going to have to hand it IQ samples. So I did the float to complex here in order to get a complex value coming out this side. Now let's talk about this for a minute, because what does float to complex do? Well, it takes a sample from this port and a sample from this port, calls it IQ, and spits it out the end. Now, if you look real close, you'll see this port, this top orange port has RE, and the bottom port has IM, has labels. You might know what those are. That's real and imaginary. So the first number, or the I value that's going to pop out the end of this, is going to be the real value. Let's say it's 0.7. And this bottom imaginary value is going to be 0, coming from the constant source. So technically, if I was to feed some other source value in here, I'm going to shift the phase. But that's not needed. All you got to do is just plug this like a dummy load with a 0. And now you're going to get IQ samples coming out of here, where the real value is the only thing that's changing, and the imaginary value is sitting at 0. That works fine. And it's a fractional resampler. It needs a little bit of explanation. We didn't have to have it up here because we were able to manage the sample rate from beginning to end. So we could talk about that a little bit, but basically the sample rate was 48K for everything. And that's because it's a simulation, and we can certainly use something like 48K. There's no hardware other than this. There's no hardware at all in this one at the top. But there would be if we lit up the audio source, right? So we do have the potential to have a 48K real world radio, not radio, but hardware source limiter there. So anyway, the sample rate was 48K in the top, and it worked because of what I've just said. Now down below, I knew already that the lowest acceptable, easy to handle sample rate for the hack RF was 1 megasamples per second. So you see the 1M in there. Well, knowing that I have to end at 1M, and I'm starting at 48 kilohertz over here, I'm going to multiply by 1,000 and then divide by 48. And that's going to give me 1 million coming out here. And I did the math down here in the comments. So the audio frequency source at 48K, interpolation, which you think multiply, times 1,000 is 48 million. And then decimate by 48, think divide by 48, you spit out 1 million. So that's the reason for the rational resampler, which was to adjust the sample rate so that it gets down to the right rate, or up, whatever way you want to talk about it. It went up and then down through that resampler. Okay, so that's the transmit side. Now the receive side has some interesting changes to it. Nothing we can't understand or swallow here, but this, as I said, this finite impulse response filter was a little overkill, and I found that this low-pass filter worked just fine. It also helped me with the shift in sample rate that I saw was coming. And so let's kind of work it backwards. The speaker is 48 kilohertz as a sample rate. That's going to be fixed by my laptop. I've got an audio gain here, or a volume control. And then the AM demodulator, which I explained earlier, actually combines the complex to mag and the bandpass filter in one block. So this worked out extremely well, but you could replace it with the complex to mag and the bandpass filter. ELL carrier tracking is very unique, and I had to do some learning on this, but basically this loop bandwidth is the lock range. So it's You best to look this up in the documentation. The explanation is very clear and not that hard, but it's how wide it will lock on a carrier. And then the minimum frequency and maximum frequency values are also separate inputs, and they translate to actual frequencies. So from minus 500 hertz to positive 500 hertz. This top one last time, that loop bandwidth is a measurement in radians. So remember, we've talked about radians, and it's radians per sample. So it really deserves kind of a discussion on its own. Let's keep going. AGC was the exact copy of the same one we had in the simulation. And then this low-pass filter versus the frequency translating filter. Here in the simulation, we just use a decimation of 1, which means don't do anything, or divide by 1. So it has no impact. This low-pass filter is where I did my sample rate adjustments. So let's talk through those, similar to what we just did with the transmitter. The RTL SDR has a variety of sample rates that it can handle. I found 288 kilosamples to work out real well, because if you take 200 kilohertz and divide it by 6, you get 48 kilohertz. And so all I had to do is do a decimation of 6 here against these 288 kilohertz samples coming in per second. And I'm already at 48K all the rest of the way. So you see my note says I arrived at this at working backwards from the acceptable sample rate for RTL SDR. Yeah, so I had, first time I ran this, I had something different in the RTL SDR, and it complained and said that's not an acceptable sample rate. So I took this 48 and I said, okay, well, I'm going to multiply that times 3, 4, 5, 6 until I reach a number that the documentation for the RTL SDR says is acceptable as a sample rate. And it turned out to be 288. I was trying to stay as low as I could on this here because we're asking all of this to go through a USB port. And I don't know at what point I'm going to choke down and have underruns. And that's a whole subject unto itself. And you may run into some problems when you're playing with SDR where you have overruns or underruns. And basically there is a scheduler that's moving the data. And it's got to have queues. It's got to go in a queue and then have a reader that's reading and writing upstream as it moves. And if anything gets clogged up, there'll be underruns. And if there's anything that goes empty, so the writer has nothing to suck up, then you're going to have underruns. And in my case, I have a console that will throw out the errors. If I can find my mouse, I'll show it to you. Here's my console. I don't think I can scroll it. Yeah, I can scroll this. So I might be able to actually find the error where it started complaining when I was messing with it. But we won't spend a lot of time searching for an error. There it is, I think. No, that's some other error, but yeah, there's some overruns right there. So you can see the 00000 bunches of them. That's when you're playing around with the sample rate and you're having some problems. And usually this will make a noise if you have something audible that you can play with. I just saw that error, and now I've moved the cursor too far. Yeah, all right. I don't need Alexa here. So that's what we've got to play with today. And about the only thing else I could add here is that you're going to see an example of radios that are not on the same frequency. And if you're in a microwave, and some of you are, you know that when the radios are not on the same clock, they can't be on the same frequency. Not after multiplying it, 78 times or 12 times or whatever. There's going to be something that generates a 3 megahertz signal or a 3 gigahertz signal, and in a 10 gig rig. and then it's going to multiply it. And all of that stuff needs to have a reference, or it will not be dead nuts on the next guys. I'll put it that way. And we talk a lot about this, but we're going to see an example of it here. Anytime we have two devices like the RTL SDR, the hack RF, and I'm actually going to use an analog radio in this demo so that you can see the signal being received on 432.2 on an ICOM 705. So let's just go ahead and play that video. Made this morning about 10:30.
All right, we're recording now. First thing I'm going to do with this flow graph, which is titled NTMS_AM_proto.grc, is...
Are you guys hearing the audio from the video?
Yeah, I sure am. I have to turn it up a little bit, but I can hear it.
Okay.
I'm going to disable all the transmit blocks, and so that we can just test the receive side. Receive side consists of an RTL SDR, which is located right here on this USB power hub, and then we'll go through the transitions. We have several instrumentation items, and then we end up, there's a volume control with this multiply constant. We end up with the audio sync, which is the speaker of the laptop. So we'll go ahead and get started. And make sure this volume is down a little low so that it doesn't overdrive our presentation. Now, we've got controls like filter, so that will tighten up the filter, as you can see down here in the waterfall display. That's only about 4 kilohertz wide, I think, yeah. That's about 4 kilohertz. And then we get it up here, it's about close to 10. We'll leave it right there. We have, like I said, a volume control. Transition width on the filter is not too effective. And then the frequency for the receiver. We'll have to tune this to find, to zero in on our signal, because, as I said before, without sharing clocks, they're never going to be exactly the same. Now, I have a little device here that is it's a signal generator. I have several of these. Back when I had a project where I had to have several different frequencies input, and as soon as I plug it in, you should be able to see this. There is a big spike here that's only about 5 dB down. Now you hear the drifting of this unreferenced signal generator. It has TCXO in it, but it's not great. So it's down 8 there. These harmonics are down 38, and I noticed that the polarization sensitive. So if I flip this thing 90 degrees, the harmonics go away. So that's kind of an interesting observation, is that they have a place in there where they're, even 80 degrees to the horizon, they just start disappearing. That's kind of an interesting observation. Okay, so now I'll just unplug that, and we'll go back and we'll enable, and I'll tip over my camera, we'll enable the transmit blocks, and now we'll have two things going on in this flow graph with two different radios, in fact. So the audio source here will be a microphone input. It's across the room right now because I'm going to play Carl Sagan off my wife's phone, and I don't want it to be right up here on the computer's microphone. And so that drives through these familiar components that we've talked about in the flow graph, and then eventually out through the hack RF as a transmitter. And then we just tested the receive side. So when we fire this up, we're going to see that carrier. It'll be the first thing that we're going to see. I'll probably have to turn that volume down just a little bit as well. Yeah. See, it's not too bad when you first start, but that AGC block starts to raise it up. So there's our carrier. It's very clear to see that we have a carrier there. And I can go ahead and queue up this video, or it's just a recording of Carl Sagan, and we'll see him modulate our flow graph. Okay, it's out of tune.
Everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone ever was, without their lives. The arrogance or joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines. Every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful child, inventor and explorer, every moral singer in the history of our species, there, on the mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam. The earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena of the rivers of blood spilled by all the kings and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they can become the military masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How they become their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds, our postures, our imagined self-importance.
I'm going to shut the volume down now and turn on the ICOM analog radio, which is also tuned to 432.2 or thereabouts.
In the great enveloping cosmic dark, in our security, in all this vastness, there is no end. The help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The earth is the
Yeah, it's looking at 50 kilohertz full span on I notice.
at least in the near future, to which our species could migrate.
That's
Yes.
100 kilohertz. Pretty hard to see the sidebands, but you can see them. So thank you, Mr. Sagan, again for the speech. And that concludes this demonstration.
All right, I realize it chopped off a little bit of the left side of the FFT display, unfortunately, but yeah, I did freeze the FFT spectrum there for a moment so that we could look at the sidebands and just measure how far down they were. Of course, they would go higher, the sidebands, if the volume on the output of that telephone had been higher into that microphone. Anything that would increase the gain there would cause the sidebands to, increase. They're basically just coming from the left side here and then in and about at the HAC RF. I will put this on the website, of course, and the video. And are there any questions about what we've demonstrated here? All right. Let's talk about the homework coming up. Made a list down here. So I would ask you to try to find an ASK device at your home. Why? Because while we're on amplitude modulation, we should cover amplitude shift keying. This is a pretty simple subject, but it's been employed forever. As long as we've had radios. And many of you and I know it as one of the most elementary forms of ASK is on and off keying. It's still amplitude keying, but we know it as CW. And so I'm going to ask you to find an ASK device at your home. Some examples would be a garage door opener, controller for raising or lowering blinds, controller for a ceiling fan. Be sure it's not Bluetooth. And then look up the device on the FCC website. So I've got a cluster of them here. I'm anal about collecting these things, and I've got a couple of them here. I got this one that's got 2 buttons on it, and it's got digital switches inside. And then this one is a kind of it has a reed switch in it. And so when the door opens that has the magnet, it breaks the bond, and closes the circuit and transmits a signal to the mothership, for the security system. Here's one that I'm going to show you how I looked up. And these numbers on the back, the FCC ID, was so hard to read that I had to look at it under the microscope, and I finally got it. And so you got to be careful when you go look this stuff up, because you want to pick this. You can put in FCC ID search, but you want to pick this one that's the genuine FCC.gov site. Because if you don't, then you get I think it's called FCC.io that somebody's created. You just get a blizzard of advertisements, trick buttons to push that will get you a virus probably. So you go here, and I think I have some of these screens still up where I did this. Can't see, they're all behind a window that Zoom has up here, right? There they are. All right, so I'm going to go there and I'll show you how I entered this data. So you go here. Then it's got what it calls a what's it called? The grantee code. The grantee code. And then, so there's two parts, and that'll be marked on the back of your device. You would think I've never used a computer before. So the grantee code was 2AQXW, and then it populated this from when I typed it in before. The other part was 371LM. And so go here. Says it doesn't have it. Okay. Well, that's what happens when you do stuff in the real time instead of recording it ahead of time. Let me just eliminate this, because we can go look at everything this company has, and I can find it that way. Do this. All right. So it's ends in 371. Here it is down here. See this 2AQXW-371 Lima Mite. So you go to the detail. There's two links that are sandwiched together here. You go to the detail and click that one. And it warns you that, these exhibits were provided by the applicant, blah, 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 blah. Test report. Some of this other stuff's interesting. The test setup is, how they have the chamber set up so that RF signals are absorbed, and where they put the receiver and the spectrum analyzer and all that. Kind of interesting. But if you go to this test report, you get down here and look here. Modulation type, ASK. Operation frequency, 315. So what I'd like you to do is see if you can get that far. And then if you can get that far, just take a plain AM receiver like we got down here. Disable the transmitter. Now, right this second, I have the RTO SDR still plugged in over here. We're going to use it to run this graph. And I've pre-created, I can't seem to get down far enough on the graph. I pre-created this block here with the right frequency in it. So we're going to disable the 432 stuff. And we're going to enable, and I just go show you these real quick. So it's 350 e to the 6. So it's going to come up at 315 megahertz. But I have a slider here that we can adjust the frequency from 314.5 E6 to 315.5 E6. in 100 steps. So that's more than enough. We'll enable that, and then we'll run the flow graph. It's the delay. Yeah. Guess something's having to work hard to make that happen. Stop it and start it again. Well, what it did before I started the meeting is I ran this flow graph and I transmitted with that device. I pushed the button on this. Here it is. It's coming up. Hey, it made it. All right. So watch what happens when I press this button. Get your faces out of the way again, or my face out of the way again. Okay, watch. You can stop this amplitude, the time sync, time sync. I was able to stop it. It kind of looks binary, doesn't it? So it could be that these three. I don't want to let go of that, or it'll zoom in there like too much. Did that. Yeah, you're lost when that happens, and you can forget about getting it back. But those were interesting signals or as an interesting signal with modulation on it, because it could be a number of different ways that the symbols are constructed or the digital modulations being analyzed. And of course, that's all about the receiver, because you're trying to operate a remote device. So let's see if I can stop this again. Okay, we'll stop there. So when you look at this, it could be as fundamental as a pulse above a certain threshold is a 1, and anything else, a time of any kind is a 0. So these would all be 1s, and all the values would be 0s. But it's more likely that this, that some amplitude that's held for some period of time is a 1, and then the other ones that are below that period of time represent 0s. So my ask is to learn how to demodulate this. It seems that there would need to be a threshold that you draw a line, and then you would determine if you're going to look at the length of the pulse or the presence of the pulse, or count both. And so we're all of a sudden in a world of digital modern symbol creation and decomposition. So I want to go through this before we leave this subject, and we're going to go through some math, and I want to try to visualize this from the radio's perspective, not just in the DC, kind of like what we're showing here. This is more baseband related, but there's also a radio side to this, and the differences between amplitude modulation, where we're speaking, or there's music or tone, amplitude shift keying, all varieties of that, phase shift keying, and then quadrature modulation. I think those are the next steps to kind of conquering everything that's in this realm. you can go into FM and some other modulation schemes that are more exotic. But this is where we have to walk before we run. And I think we're going down the right path here. Anyway, this is pretty interesting. See what you've got in the way of I wonder what frequency this one's on. Wonder if it happened. You know, this is a different one, and it's actually on the same frequency, or close enough. It does look like it's off a little down here. Well, not by much. 80.08 kilohertz, 80 hertz. So, yeah, you can see it right here on the left side. It's very close to where we had the other signal. But look at those spikes. That's interesting. So that's my presentation for today. Clean this up a little bit before we upload it. And, if you don't have a transmitter, then you want to disable everything across the top that I just enabled. Play with the receive side. See the red text there is telling me, hey, you got two variables with the same name. So we'll disable the 315 megahertz variable that was controlling the RTL to SDR just then. That's all I've got. Any questions?
None for me, but thank you very much. I look forward to the exercise. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. And if nothing more, I'll stop the recording and get this video processed and up on the website and so forth. Thanks, everybody, for coming by today.
Yeah,
See you next time.
Thanks for hosting.
You bet. Bye-bye.